feel very multicultural because from London, from Newcastle, Linda from Ireland. You know, I feel very
Essex.
Essex. I don't know where that is.
Nor do I.
And good morning. My name's Jim Ridley, and I am trying to work out how to do this. Oh no, there we go. It says James on there because otherwise I would be Jimmy Riddle. And I promised Joy I wouldn't use that joke, but I just can't resist after Paul.
I do blame Paul for this, you know.
I blame Paul for this too. I'm definitely going to take his number. And my role, my recent role, and I'm very conscious the boss is sat in front of me, is a lead assessor within BILD as part of the Physical Intervention Training Accreditation Scheme. And that's a relatively recent role for me. My day job is that I'm a senior lecturer in pre-registration nurse education. And I'm a learning disability nurse. So as Joy said before, although I love being an educator, I'm a piece of rock for LD nursing. It runs right through me. And supporting the needs of people with learning disabilities is something I've been very passionate about since a very, very long time. I'm not going to tell you how much, but the grey hair probably gives it away. And what I've been asked to do is I've been asked to kind of step in for a colleague from BILD. And I've been asked to look at workforce development. So talking about workforce, which I will do in some respects, but also talk about accreditation. And I know that has been a focus of yesterday, and there's a big focus in looking at physical intervention training, restraint reduction, and restrictive practice minimisation, etc. programs. So why do we need to develop our workforce? Well, I've used a couple of references that I've become very familiar with over my career, really. And Ted Carr is one of them. And what he said was that no approach to managing severe problem behaviours is ever likely to be taken seriously unless we look at how we're going to manage crisis. I was a community learning disability nurse in Liverpool, and I loved that job. And I loved that job for many reasons. But one of the reasons that I loved it the most was because I'm sure people thought I was an impressionist. Because I don't know how many teams I went into, and they all thought I was blooming Paul Daniels. Because they all assumed I was going to come in with a magic wand. You, Jim, or James, as we start off, you, Jim, will bring this magic wand. I had Debbie McGee in the booth, by the way. And you will create this magical intervention for us that will stop us managing crisis. And I said, whoa. No, sorry, Paul, I'm using some of your techniques now. I don't think I will. So we know that that's something we need to think about. We know that it's not just staff teams who are dealing with behaviours that are seen as challenging. We have to work, and I have worked very closely with families, and we know that specific strategies are needed to support families, to respect individuals, to promote independence. I'm a big advocate for positive behavioural support, and one thing I love about PBS is the person-centred value element to it. Yeah, I'm a behaviourist. I've worked in behavioural support for a long, long time, but the thing that gets me up in the morning around PBS is that it's about the person. And then we had Hawkins. And I think this kind of starts us moving into that kind of reality of workforce, developing a workforce, looking at accreditation. And what Hawkins said was that, we need to train carers in safe, ethical, reactive strategies. And although it's a minor, but it is a critical component of positive behavioural support. So going back to what Carr said in the mid-90s, no strategy is going to work unless we look at crisis, unless we look at supporting people at times of difficulty. So I had to read through the Positive Proactive Workforce document. And clearly what we need to think about when we're looking at workforce is, who are they? Who are my workforce? What do I want them to do? Where do we expect them to do it? What skills, knowledge, attitudes, values, confidence and competencies do they need? But I think also, what do they already have? When can I assess and improve the level of skills needed and the level that workers have? And how will I develop those skills that the workers already have? And I've never worked with anybody who hasn't had some skill in working with people, hasn't got some form of communication, hasn't got some part of their personality which is engaging to people that you're working with. So sometimes it is about somebody like myself or other people training, saying, right, okay, doing a training needs analysis and we'll do this. Sometimes it's also about asking the individuals that we're working with, our colleagues, families, what skills do you have? Can you tell me how you manage crisis on certain days? Can you tell me how you work through some of these issues that you've got? And for me, and certainly for us, how we continue to develop those skills. Now, one of the things for me that's missing in there is the person. Because the person will have skills that we need to know. They may already have. And actually, we may need to think about how we develop those skills in that individual too. Because some of the best educational experiences I've had have been with people I've supported. I've learned such a lot from the people I've supported. And some of it has taken years. Some of it's taken days. But I've learned a lot. I just picked out some of the elements from the Positive Proactive Workforce. And what it said was, it's in terms of learning providers, that learning providers will work in partnership with person commissioning their package of learning and do that in collaboration with the people who are being supported. I think that's an absolute fundamental. It's about working together, ensuring that the learning being delivered meets the needs of the individual, the service, and some of the requirements, recommendations given by organisations such as Skills for Care. So we're starting to talk about standards. We're starting to identify that these are things that we know or we assume or we've worked on that can actually support individuals in terms of learning and training. And the last one for me, and I've highlighted it because I think for me it kind of links in with how I perceive accreditation, is that a learning provider needs to be willing, skilled, and able to challenge existing practice when required. So we look at accreditation, and I think accreditation kind of captures that last kind of quote, really. We're not new to accreditation. Internationally, it's used as a way to improve performance. We know that accreditation has been shown to promote change, to make changes, to make difference. And sometimes just the preparation for accreditation processes makes us stop, take a breath, think about. Accreditation is usually a formal process, usually done by a recognised body, somebody who's possibly got some form of evidence base in relation to that field. Usually non-governmental, because it's not like we get much from the government in terms of guidance, is it? Occasionally the civil servants, I do believe, do get out of the hobbit hole. We're looking at giving organisations some acknowledgement that they're meeting those predetermined standards. So what's the value of accreditation? Well, it's been continuously supported for many reasons. It can offer effective strategies for assuring quality. Again, get us to stop and think. Get us to stop and think what we're doing well. How many times do we pat ourselves on the back and say, well done, we did that well? Probably not as many times as we say, whew, we got that wrong. It can result in better organisational performance. Again, it can make us stop, think, adapt. It can support cooperative approaches. And I think one of the other things is it can provide external stakeholders with a guide to say that organisations' management of quality and safety has been set against some form of standard, some form of quality statement. As I said before, we're not we're used to accreditation. Accreditation isn't new. And these are just some examples that I found when I was doing and I just did a Google search for accreditation scheme. I actually found quite a lot of licensing schemes and regulatory schemes. But any of us who have worked in health, certainly, will know about the Royal College of Psychiatry's accreditation schemes. And, you know, some of the wards I work into or have worked into and continue to work into very proudly present their AIMS accreditation. So we know that organisations and staff, because I've heard colleagues say it too, are very proud of the fact that they've gone and found out that they are doing the job that's being asked of them. We know about Ofsted, and I'm not from a teaching or a young children and young persons background, but I found some Ofsted accreditation schemes. As a nurse, I'm very, very aware of the accreditation from the NMC, even more so as an educator, because we get through nothing. We put nothing through universities, certainly in terms of nurse education, without some form of accreditation from the NMC. Likewise with the HCPC. And quite rightly, we have the BILD accreditation scheme, which has been long running. So the PTAS scheme. Set up in 2002. It was about that development of standards which could be used to assess organisations' training. And the most current code of practice was written in 2014. And some of you will probably either work for organisations that have got BILD accreditation, possibly been through the accreditation process yourself, or maybe commissioning learning from organisations where they have BILD accreditation. It's about supporting organisations around their training. It's based on a broad theoretical perspective, and it supports an evidence base related to restraint and restrictive practice reduction. As I said, I'm a nurse, and I say to my students, remember when I started out my training, that we work from an evidence base. So for me, the BILD, the PTAS program is built on the evidence base. Yeah? The current code of practice, I think, is the 4th edition. So it's developed based on what we know. Yeah? Myself, colleagues at BILD are talking about how we develop the PTAS program and how it should reflect current evidence, practice, research and theory. We know that commissioners and government bodies have made reference to the PTAS program as an example of good practice, or as an aid in relation to decisions related to learning provider commissioning. Although I am aware that direct reference to the PTAS program has been taken out of certain documents, but we are still hearing that BILD accreditation, and having been a commissioner of learning provision for a NHS trust, it was one of the first things we put on our list when we were looking at, and that's some time ago, when we were looking at restrictive practice training for our inpatient community teams. We didn't start off with, well, we want, we want these techniques and we want this, that and the other. No, we started off with BILD accreditation. We felt that was an important element. So what about the future for PTAS? New guidance has been developed related to physical intervention, also looking to working with schools and education providers so they can seek their own accreditation. There is a plan to pilot the PTAS program in Australia, hopefully by the end of this year. And there has been some interest being shown by other countries. Because I think, as Joy said, and other people have possibly said yesterday, there is a real buzz around understanding and minimising restrictive practice. There is to be a new code of practice, probably in 2017, which is going to be more of a universal approach. So we're going to look at different populational groups. And when I say populational groups, I mean people that we support. Populational groups where physical or restrictive interventions are used. And we're going to look at it from an international perspective. There's been the setup of the Mental Health Steering Group, which will consider a current accreditation scheme and how it possibly can be used within mental health services and provision. And I know there's a pilot due to start around that relatively soon. And we also know that the PTAS programme is still well thought of. It's still well regarded. And there's an interest in endorsing the BILD PTAS programme from professional bodies and other networks, professional networks, even such as the Restraint Reduction Network. And I just want to finish off. Anybody who's seen me discuss anything really around restrictive practice will have always seen me end with this slide. And I've added Star Trek, not because it's the 50th anniversary and they're in Birmingham, because I'm not a closet Trekkie, because I'm out of the closet in terms of being a Trekkie. But Maslow said that if all we have in our toolbox is a hammer, then all the world looks like a nail. And as a physical intervention instructor, as an educator, I would say that, you know what, if all I give my students or my staff is one tool, then, and it's the hammer, then quite rightly, they're going to hit everything with a hammer. For me, clearly we need to develop that toolbox. And the reason I put the Haynes Manual on there is to represent accreditation. And the reason I put the Haynes Manual on there is because somebody else has unpicked that. Somebody else has thought about what goes where, how it should work together, what the standard should be for the USS Enterprise. Yeah? And yeah, I might have some idea about what it is I want to do, but I've got something to work to. I've got something where I can use my tools to develop something that's important to me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, James. We have got some time in James's slot.
I wasn't quick enough there, was I?
So, are there any questions or comments that you've got for James? Otherwise, it's an early bath. Yes, sir. Don't forget to say who you are.
Alistair's my name.
Alistair.
Do you think that BILD will ever accredit mental health services?
I think the pilot programme will give us a lot of answers to maybe some of the questions that are being raised in relation to that. I don't see why not. I work full-time lecturer in education, but I was never going to hang up my nursing boots. So I work in practice and continue to work in practice. And some of the principles that I'm aware of within the PTAS programme, around BILD, around positive behavioural support, I use and explain to my colleagues who are working within mental health services. I think there is a lot of similarity in relation to the theoretical basis that we have that crosses not just learning disabilities, not just mental health services, not just children's services, brain injury services. I said this to a group of students yesterday afternoon. Before I came, I was teaching third-year mental health students. I was telling them about PBS. And I said, you know what, I remember somebody saying to me, well, PBS, that doesn't mean anything to us. That's very LD related. And I said, I'll have to have a look at that. And they looked at me a bit strange, as if to say, LD nurse, really, you don't know that, right? I thought, well, positive behavioural support. Do you know, I can't find anything that says learning disability in that title. The theory base is what's important. Person-centred values, normalisation approaches, understanding what somebody's day should be like for them, what's important to them, but clearly using the scientific balance of applied behaviour analysis so that we get that. Now, I've worked in mental health services, and mental health services use formulations, so they understand and they use assessments, so they have a scientific basis. They work with patients to look at what's their everyday norm, so kind of that normalisation, that socialisation agenda. And they also base it around who that person is. That sounds like PBS to me. I'm not saying we should necessarily take that and badge it on everything, but let's be real. You know, the theory base is sound. In relation to whether BILD will accredit mental health services, I suppose for me, it's why not? Why shouldn't we ask the question? Last time I looked, we're about learning. We're about evidence base. You only get an evidence base if you try something out or you ask the question.
Thanks, Alistair. Any other comments or questions to James? Okay, James, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.